we develop a lot more ideas than we ever actually execute. We have a big pile of never executed, but perhaps to come back to ideas. And so it's an intuitive thing. We throw out ideas that are interesting to us. In a certain way, I'd imagine it's not dissimilar to, say, a late night stand-up comedy TV program where people brainstorm, a group of writers brainstorm together, they have dozens of ideas and some stick and some don't. But that, by the nature of a collaborative process, means that you always have a sounding board through which you can determine whether something works and something doesn't. And I think at the heart of the project is the fact that we trust each other implicitly to be honest about what we think about the other's ideas. And sometimes one of us will come up with an idea, we'll mull it over, it will change, mutate, develop. It may go off on a tangent somewhere completely different, but ultimately it's the fact that we're working together and being honest with one another and having a pretty good sense by this point of what seems to work and what doesn't. Because almost all of the projects that now come to fruition will get responses from the external audience that A, mesh somewhat with our intentions, but B, also open up entirely new response sets that we hadn't necessarily considered. And that, I think, for us is the most important part of it, the fact that there are things that we had not counted upon that come out of the work.
And for me, as a practical matter, I've never been as good an editor of my own ideas as I'd like to be, which is why I think I probably have to work through somebody else. The amount of ideas that I've brought to Adam that have not been accepted is astronomical. I've got 5 ideas a day, and 5 ideas a day pretty much suck, and every now and then one will work, and if it works with him, then it works for us. And I really appreciate that opportunity. If I was to make every idea that I come up with, I'm sure it would be a body of work that nobody would want to look at. But the idea of a marriage for me is, the analogy to a marriage is true on so many levels. Most of us know at least a marriage or a relationship where it either works or it doesn't, and you know each other there's an unspoken understanding, and you bring, is this right, is that a good idea, and the other person agrees, and all of a sudden it's the third mind is generated. And that's why I think collaboration is so wonderful, and also why collaboration is so difficult. To find someone that you can work with where it truly works and it's not hierarchical. I've worked with so many people where it hasn't worked for one reason or another. So to bring ideas to Adam, to edit those back to those that are appropriate for industry, the ordinary, this is an ongoing, everyday and quite ordinary process. We'll be sitting under, we rarely sit in the studio and sketch and draw and work through materials. We'll be sitting having a sandwich, or under ordinary circumstances we're watching the TV, and it'll go backwards and forwards, nothing is at stake really, and all of a sudden something works, and then that becomes the next project.
And conversely to Matt, I have fewer ideas, but they're all fully formed when they come out, beautifully faceted, and he's bowled over by them.
No, he's a genius.
Because we spent a good deal of time on the title for the project. It wasn't something that came out immediately, and we bandied back and forth a number of titles, and finally we happened upon this because it seemed to be open-ended enough so that we could fit almost anything into it, which I think was an important aspect of the way that we were to proceed. If we were going to work under another kind of title rather than just our names, and that's what we would become known as, although again I don't think this was necessarily as premeditated as it might have been. Nonetheless, we wanted to find a working space through the title of the project that allowed us as much freedom as possible to be able to explore virtually anything. And the word ordinary does have such kind of pejorative overtones to it that was something that we grasped and acted as a challenge, in a sense, to be able to make work that could fall under that moniker but at the same time go beyond it.
And the industry was sort of a process of making. We were engaged in this. It was a constant thing. It wasn't teleological. We weren't going to make a single piece and then finally, dissolve our relationship. It was a series of pieces, unending pieces, to work towards something unseen or unknowable. So industry was a way of acknowledging our interest in process rather than necessarily at that stage at least product. Right?
Yeah.
All the work that I did prior to Industry of the Ordinary was about public-sided performance art. So every audience was inevitably, because I was being so roundly ignored by the art world, every audience was accidental, and I still enjoy and get a thrill out of doing that. But when we're in the museum or the gallery setting, certainly the content of the work never changes, and the audience that we get there are often made up of some of the people that have known the work from the very beginning, and these are not art world people, and that's a real privilege, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, the content stays the same, the context changes or slips around a bit.
Which will, context will affect content, so the work will be different for different people, but it was always intended that way in the first place. Just because we're making public-sided performance work for an accidental audience doesn't mean that we're dumbing it down, and that's always been a point of real importance to both of us. You set you decide what you want to say, and you say that, and my experience has always been that these audiences that you'll find in the street are fully capable of being as engaged and as bright and as intelligent as the audiences that we're going to find in the museum. In fact, when you go into the gallery, those audiences are often ignoring the work because they're nonchalant, they know it already. So it's exciting sometimes to go out into the street and people are truly excited by something unusual, and that interaction is really valuable. There's no hierarchy for me in terms of audience. It's very difficult to divorce the reaction that your work gets from the need to make the work in the first place. So the fact that we enjoyed working together, we found a series of strategies that suited both of us, which is unusual in a collaboration like a marriage. Sometimes it seems to work and most times it doesn't. So for me, the reaction that's always made me feel that we were on the right track was the work has been received well from the museum or gallery community that we all have to deal with, fellow artists and guys down at the pub. Equally strongly, in different ways, perhaps, admittedly, but the audience has been broad, and the ordinariness of the content, the stuff that makes us interested, seems to make not only the art world respond, but the people in our everyday lives, and that's been really exciting to me, that I can get into, and we were talking about it earlier, so many conversations in gas stations or bars or wherever we happen to be, and something that we've done, or the T-shirt that we're wearing right now, will spark a conversation, and that is as important a reaction and as gratifying a response as the gallery or the museum setting that we're all used to dealing with as well.
If there's any sense that we are allowing people to reconsider things that they thought were fixed, then I think we're succeeding. There is the period of time during a performance where you're so focused on the work that, in a sense, you're not aware of what's going on because the concentration level is so high. But inevitably, if you're working out in the public arena, there are going to be constant questions, and in a sense, the interaction with people who are not expecting to see what it is that you're presenting becomes incorporated into the flow of the performance or the gesture or the action, whatever you want to call it, because for me, coming from a less overtly performative standpoint in my prior activities as an artist, this is still relatively new and something that is really fascinating. The way that you don't, in a kind of mime like Marcel Marceau way, ignore the fact that there's an audience around you. The audience and their response becomes sucked into the activity and, in a sense, continues as it's unfolding to be the fertilizer for it, and helps to make determinations about where that particular piece goes in the moment that it's being produced, but also as we go forwards determines perhaps certain strategies or mechanisms that we continue to examine as we develop newer work.
And I'll take an example that predates Industry of the Ordinary as a moment where I started to realise the power of this kind of activity, for me at least. I had always created pieces that were sort of open-ended. They were like an open metaphor. It was designed. They were designed to draw people's interest, but the meaning was kind of the responsibility of this mass accidental audience, or whatever happened around this event, like 100 people falling over simultaneously in business suits. No explanation. What does this mean? And then the city would become, or the vicinity would become absorbed into what this meant. People's reactions would further, or it would finish the piece. And I was doing a piece back in, what year was it, 96, the Oklahoma bombing, was it 96? And
94 maybe.
94. And I organised 100 people to freeze in the act of moving through Federal Plaza one year, and this gesture built up slowly. There was only one person who could have just been standing still momentarily. You wouldn't notice him. Then another person, then another person. Before long, there were dozens of people, all frozen in some kind of motion. It was up to them what they were doing that they would freeze in the middle of. All kinds of different gestures were frozen there in the plaza, and at that, we didn't realise, but about an hour prior to this event taking place in Chicago, the Oklahoma Federal Building had blown up, and so the Fed showed up, Chicago PD showed up, news stations showed up. I mean, the place was packed with people giving interviews and running around and lights flashing, because of course they were concerned about the security of the Federal Building in Chicago. And my performers, of course accidentally, were frozen in motion in the background of so many of these news broadcasts that were going out live at that particular moment. as this was only gradually understood by people that were there that started to notice that, you know, that guy over there has not moved for the last 20 minutes. And so they tried to work out what this was about. People were getting quite unnerved by it. Somebody mentioned that it was me. I was standing at a distance across the street. They came and found me. I was giving these interviews about whether, you know, what my performance was about, and did I realize that the building in Oklahoma had just exploded and this was news to me. In other words, life overtook everything that I thought this piece was about in the first place, but it overtook it in such a way not to downplay the, you know, the significance of what happened in Oklahoma, of course, but my performance was open-ended enough so that these frozen people in the act of moving through our plaza were in some way an accidental remembrance of what happened an hour prior to that. And I realized that I'd stumbled onto something that could be more significant than I imagined.
And I think that we can draw a parallel with one of our pieces, which is the piece 10, in which we made an ice sculpture of the Ten Commandments, sculpture that Judge Roy Moore, the one-time Chief Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court, had put into the lobby of the building, the Supreme Court building down in Alabama. We were interested in the way that this object had become a catalyst for so much kind of commentary, and so we made this ice sculpture of the piece and wheeled it through Chicago with a tap attached to it. So as the piece melted, we siphoned off the water and filled bottles, each one of which was sandblasted with the word faith, and gave these out to people on the street as we traversed our way down Michigan Avenue. But another event had taken place earlier that morning, which was the spring before last, which was that Terry Schiavo, the young woman who had been on life support for several years, actually finally died. And so this was the kind of backdrop to that piece in some people's minds, that there was a parallel or a connection drawn between our action and something else which we hadn't considered, but accidentally became part of the backdrop, which in a sense I think is one of the things that's interesting to us, because there's no way obviously that we can ever account for everything that's going on at any particular moment in time, but the fact of being out in public and using material that has, we would hope, strong resonances across a very broad swath of the general public means that those kind of connections will inevitably be established in a way that we couldn't possibly envision ahead of time.
Industry is the ordinary.